We're with Amy Goodman. She's the author of An Exception to the Rulers and host of Pacifica Radio's Democracy Now! Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
Amy, why did you feel that you needed to write a book about this?
Because I think the media has reached an all-time low at this point, and we need to reclaim it. When you look at the media leading up to the invasion of Iraq and the kind of icing out of dissent that took place, FAIR, the Media Watch Group in New York, did a study of the week leading up to Colin Powell's address at the UN Security Council and the week afterwards. And they looked at the four major nightly newscasts, ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS's NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. There were 393 interviews done around war. 3 were with anti-war representatives, 3 of almost 400. That is a media beating the drums for war. And that does a disservice to a democratic society. It's not what people felt in this country.
Why did you think that happened?
Well, in the exception to the rulers, which, by the way, I think all media should be, it shouldn't just be our motto at Democracy Now! Or the motto of Pacifica Radio, but we are supposed to be the exception to the rulers. There's a reason why our profession is enshrined in, protected by the Constitution. We're supposed to be the check and balance on those in power. And I think all media should be this way. Provide a sanctuary for dissent, because dissent is what makes this country healthy. In the book, my brother David Goodman and I, who wrote it with me, we call it the access of evil. It's about trading truth for access. I don't think the price is worth it.
Now, you have defined independent media. In your point of view, what is independent media?
It really could be any media that doesn't toe the line of those in power. We're supposed to be independent. I mean, I come from Pacifica Radio, which is what I would say is the only truly independent media network broadcasting in this country, accepts no corporate underwriting, started in 1949, actually by a conscientious objector. And he said there should be a media outlet not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists, and that's how Pacifica was born. As George Gerbner, founder of the Cultural Environment Movement, says, a professor at the Annenberg School of Journalism at University of Pennsylvania, not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell, that are raising our children today, but a media that takes an independent view from the establishment consensus. And I don't just mean the Bush administration, it could be any administration. I don't think the media has improved this year. Many people might think, oh no, but we're hearing a lot of reflection now on what's taken place. Well, it really is just reflecting what the Democrats and Republicans are doing. A year ago, the Democrats joined with the Republicans in supporting the invasion. John Kerry, John Edwards, they supported the invasion. Now, a year later, we're in an election year, and the Democrats are trying to distinguish themselves from the Republicans, so there's more of a debate. Unfortunately, the media largely simply reflects the debate between the Democrats and the Republicans, but the spectrum of opinion is much broader than that in this country.
But you are coming from Pacifica Radio, which is considered liberal and leftist, so you have a slant in what you do as well, don't you?
Well, I consider the establishment media my model. I know what these people think on every issue, and I don't think it's wrong for a reporter to have a point of view. We have to be honest about it, but we have to be fair and accurate in our reporting.
So it doesn't matter, as far as you're concerned, if it's from the right or from the left, as long as it's fair and accurate?
Yes, that you're really...
But how do we, as listeners or viewers, know what's fair and accurate if it's coming from different slants?
We have to give voice to those across the political spectrum. I actually think that the lines, conservative, liberal, are breaking down right now. I think conservatives, like progressives, deeply care about corporate control of our lives, care about issues of privacy, certainly care about the disaster that is Iraq right now, the whole issue of casualties. Now there are more than 700 U.S. servicemen and women who have died. We don't know how many Iraqis, but well over 10,000. And these are the people who the U.S. government said they were going in to save and liberate. It really does matter. And then you have the budget for this war. That's where conservatives also come in, who want small government, smaller budgets. I mean, it's not only the price that's being paid for what's happening in Iraq, it's the money that's taken away from taking care of people in this country. It is a complete disaster, and I think people across the political spectrum feel that way.
Now, do you feel it's important to provide different points of view in a program?
Yes.
And in your program, do you do that?
Oh, all the time. I think we probably have fiercer debate on our program, on Democracy Now!, than on most any other, because our spectrum is not between a Republican and a Democratic senator. Our spectrum is the full spectrum. It is grassroots activists. It is people in prison. It is government officials. It is people around the world. We are unembedded, international, independent. And that is very rare to have that. I mean, I don't accept, if you have a government official, you have to find someone equal or above their rank to debate them. These people who are government officials are simply employees of the American public, and they have to answer to everyone. For example, interviewing Bill Clinton, we talk about that in The Exception to the Rulers. It was Election Day 2000, and the White House called in. It was a few minutes before Democracy Now! Began. They said White House Communications. I thought they said White Horse Communications. This is, I mean, in that panic in the minutes before. White Horse is a famous tavern in New York where Dylan Thomas died. And I thought, what are they doing calling me? First of all, it's early in the morning. Why are they even up? But and I said, yeah, what do you want? We're going on the air. And they said, the president would like to speak to you. And I said, the president of what? The tavern has a president? They said, the president of the United States. Said, oh. Well, anyway, he didn't call in during that hour, but he called in the next hour, and we immediately went on the air. And they said he wanted to talk about getting out the vote. It was Election Day. Now, he doesn't determine the questions that I ask, that any journalist should ask. I did ask him about that. The first question was, why should people go out and vote? Many people feel that both parties are captured by the corporations. But then asked him many questions about whether he'd be granting executive clemency to Leonard Peltier, the Native American leader, asked him about racial profiling and the death penalty, asked him about sanctions against Iraq.
You try to get as many questions as possible.
Yes.
I could see that.
Certainly tried to get them all in. And what surprised me most was, to me, it was just routine. It's, not being on bended knee when you question those in power. The next day, the White House called and essentially said I would be banned from the White House. I said, what are you talking about? He called me. And then they said, but we had a deal that you would talk to him about getting out the vote. Well, I had no deal. I accepted no ground rules. He called up. I asked him a few of those questions, but I asked him about a lot of other issues as well. They said that they had said he only had a few minutes, and we talked to him for about half an hour. I said, my God, the man is the most powerful man in the world. He can hang up if he wants to. But I think that is the role of a journalist, and I don't think we should be in any way kowtowing to those in power.
But people who criticize your show say, Amy's doing the same thing as Rush Limbaugh. You're preaching to the choir. You're only talking to people that you agree with. And there isn't a voice of dissent in your show.
Oh, well, I mean, I completely disagree. Anyone who actually watches or listens to Democracy Now! Couldn't possibly say we don't offer the full spectrum of opinion. I think what's interesting is that Democracy Now!, in the last few years, we were broadcasting on a couple dozen community radio stations. We are now broadcasting on more than 220 Pacifica radio stations, NPR stations, PBS stations now. We have just gone on some PBS stations, our first PBS station about to go on a second, and on satellite television on Dish Network, broadcasting across Australia, across Canada on radio stations, and in Europe. 2 to 3 stations are picking us up a week, radio and TV, and there's a reason for this. People are hungry for independent voices. Throughout the period leading up to the invasion, we were interviewing CIA agents, analysts, saying, there is a problem here. There is tremendous outrage within the intelligence community that the intelligence is being manipulated, is being misrepresented. We're talking to military families, people who lost loved ones in Iraq, and we're asking questions about this. I don't think we are representing a fringe minority or a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media.
But did you feel when you were doing that because you weren't having the people who were pro-war on your show?
But we were.
You were?
We also were.
You felt that you were?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about East Timor. Why was that in your book? Why is that such an important chapter, do you think, for journalists to read about?
We begin the exception to the rulers in East Timor on November 12th, 1991, more than a decade ago. I was there with another journalist, Alan Nairn. On that day, a large demonstration had taken place, a peaceful demonstration, the Timorese protesting yet another massacre by the Indonesian military, fully armed, financed, and trained by the United States. Unfortunately, though most people didn't know about that story at the time, the U.S. was deeply connected to East Timor through the barrel of a gun. And we were there talking to people, why are you here? Why are you risking your life? This was a land where there was no freedom of assembly, no freedom of a press, no freedom of speech. And yet thousands of Timorese, it was a Catholic country, old women in their traditional Timorese garb, girls in their Catholic school uniforms, boys in their school shorts, had marched to the cemetery to honor yet another person killed by the Indonesian military. And what horrified Alan and I as we watched this, the Indonesian military marching up, carrying U.S. M16s, hundreds of them, the Timorese defenseless, thousands of them in the road. They couldn't escape because there were walls on either side of the road. The Indonesian military marched up, and without any warning, without any hesitation, without any provocation, they opened fire on the crowd. Alan and I had walked to the front of the crowd, all of our equipment in full view, headphone, microphone up like a flag. But the soldiers, that didn't stop them seeing Western journalists. They had committed many massacres in the past, and they were doing it again. They just swept past us, and they opened fire on the crowd, gunning people down from right to left. They beat us to the ground. Alan threw himself on top of me. They took their U.S. M16s like baseball bats, and they fractured his skull. And then they lined up firing squad fashion to execute us. 17 years before, there were 6 reporters covering the events leading up to the invasion of East Timor by Indonesia, and they executed them all. On this day, we were left. They put the guns to our heads. They shouted politique, because to witness something like this was political. And they shouted Australia, asking if we were from Australia. All the reporters they had executed were from Australian television 17 years before. And the Australian government had hardly raised a peep at that time of protest. Well, because I think Indonesia and Australia would soon sign the Timor Gap Treaty, dividing up the oil spoils, not with Timor, but between Indonesia and Australia. Oil has been the source of so much pain. And that day, more than 270 Timorese were killed. We were able to get into a Red Cross Jeep. Dozens of Timorese threw themselves on top of us to escape this killing field. We drove to the hospital. When we got there, the doctors and nurses who saw us started to cry, not because we were in worse shape than the Timorese, but because, I think, of what we represent to the people of Timor. And I'm talking about the American people. We represent 2 things, and not just to the people of Timor, but to people around the world. The sword, all too often, the U.S. has supported military or repressive regimes around the world, armed them, or used the weapons themselves. But we also represent the shield, the American people, that they see that it's up to us in the most powerful country on earth that we can really make a difference in the world. And on that day, they saw that shield was bloodied, and it just deepened their despair. Ultimately, though, the people of East Timor did win their freedom. And May 20th, 2002, Alan Nairn and I returned to East Timor, and we observed and joined with the people of Timor as they celebrated their freedom, watching as the president of East Timor, the longtime rebel leader, Shanana Gusmao, came to the dais, the podium, and he raised the flag of the Democratic Republic of East Timor. 200,000 Timorese had been killed, more than a third of the population, over the 25-year period since then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and then President Ford, right before December 7th, 1975, had gone to Indonesia given the go-ahead for the invasion. 90% of the weapons used were from the U.S. A third of the population wiped out in 25 years.
And you were there to tell the story. You're very critical of embedded journalists. In your point of view, how should journalists be covering the war?
From all perspectives. I mean, there is a reason why the Pentagon called the process of embedding a spectacular success. That is not a badge of honor that we should wear as journalists. Hundreds of reporters embedded in the front lines of the troops in Iraq, they are getting the invasion from one perspective, from the trigger end of the gun. What about reporters embedded in Iraqi communities, in Iraqi hospitals, embedded in the peace movement around the world, to reflect all of what is war, the true ramifications of war? And then, going from there, the whole issue of showing the images, the casualties of war. We interviewed Aaron Brown for an hour on Democracy Now!, the host, anchor on CNN, and asked him, where are the pictures? CNN is a company that runs two networks, CNN International and CNN Domestic. On CNN International, they showed many more of the casualties of war. The day the statue of Saddam Hussein went down in Baghdad, and on television all day we saw it go up, go down, go up, go down on all the networks, CNN included. CNN International did the same thing, but they had a split screen. And on half of that screen, they continued to show the casualties of war. I believe we should always show those pictures. Aaron Brown talked about them as being tasteless and saying, when we asked, where are the voices of peace here? And he said, once the war is on, they're irrelevant. What do you mean? How would the war in Vietnam have ended if those voices were considered irrelevant, if we didn't see those tasteless pictures? It's war that's tasteless. It's our responsibility to reflect the reality on the ground.
Since you come from Pacifica, you're working as an independent journalist for Pacifica, and that slant is peace at all cost. Isn't that an oxymoron? I mean, can you actually say, I am sharing all points of view, but I believe that we should have peace at all cost?
Well, I mean, I think journalists all the time talk about what they believe. Yes, they say, we support the war. Yes, the invasion is essential. That is not the issue, what reporters are saying. They say it all the time in op-ed pieces and commentary on television. What matters is that they are giving voice to the full diversity of opinion. And in this country, most people were opposed to war before the invasion, yet we saw almost none of that. What we saw on television was a parade of retired generals on the payroll of the networks. Now, if this isn't bias, you have that parade of generals on the payroll. What about peace activists coming in? I mean, I think, yeah, on the payroll maybe, but at least just invite them in. Or what about doctors? Have generals talking about, well, the kind of weapons that are being used and the companies that make them, and then just have the doctors with their little pointers showing us x-rays of what it looks like when shrapnel enters your body, what it looks like when a child is blown up from a cluster bomb. So you have the generals and you have the doctors.
Now, the mainstream media is supposed to be liberal. In your point of view, the corporate media, as you call it, who drives the corporate media?
Oh.
Who is in charge, and why are they doing this? As you say, not really telling the truth, but in the case of the war with Iraq, being cheerleaders for the war.
Yeah, very much cheerleaders for war. You look at the Persian Gulf War, for example. At that time, Westinghouse owned CBS. General Electric owned NBC. They are two of the major nuclear weapons manufacturers in the world, making most of the parts for most of the weapons in the Persian Gulf War. I don't think what we saw on television was the fact that it was a military hardware show was any accident. We need a media that is independent, that is not just viewing the world and projecting us to the rest of the world through a corporate lens. The idea that seeing these generals was not questioned on a regular basis, why you see this parade of military. I asked, actually, Frank Sesno of CNN. I was at an awards dinner. We were getting an award for our documentary called Drilling and Killing, Chevron and Nigeria's Oil Dictatorship, investigating U.S. oil corporations in the Niger Delta. And Frank Sesno was there. And afterwards, I had a chance to go up to him. He's vice president at CNN. And I asked him about this practice of putting generals on the payroll, but no peace activists. And forget about putting them on the payroll, just invite one or two of them in. I said, what about having Noam Chomsky on the air? And he said, I don't know him personally. And I thought that was a very telling answer. Here he was sitting with politicians at this black tie dinner that was supposedly honoring the highest principles of journalism. But all the politicians are there. Richard Holbrooke, it was the time of the bombing of Yugoslavia. He was very involved with that, and he was the keynote speaker that night, journalists honoring him. We, by the way, refused our award that night, believed that we should not be applauding politicians, but challenging them. And so that is his criterion, who he has dinner with, who he knows. No, I think our mandate is much broader. As journalists, we bring out all of the voices. And I think our role is to go to where the silence is to go to where we don't hear the voices, give a microphone to those we don't hear, and also tell their stories when they can't tell their own. Right now, the crackdown, and we talk about this extensively in the exception to the rulers, the crackdown on vulnerable populations in this country, Muslims, Muslim Americans, Arabs, Arab Americans, people of South Asian descent, they are afraid. Thousands of people have been arrested, have been detained, have been deported. And we don't often even know their names. It's our responsibility to find them out. Yes, that is our privilege as reporters. We have access, and we've got to use the access in that way, rather than cozying up to those in power.
Would you have, right after September 11th, you brought the voices of people who said, forgiveness, let's not attack right away, let's not go to Afghanistan and deal with this way. What is your solution?
Well, I don't even think it was forgiveness, because those women and children who died in Afghanistan had nothing to do with September 11th. But I think, first of all, is to have a media that reflects all views. I think that people in this country are very intelligent, but they need to know. As in East Timor, most people didn't even know what was taking place. It's not that they supported the U.S. arming the Indonesian military, and they thought that was a great thing, that the people of Timor were the victims of genocide that was backed by the United States. They don't think that's good. I think the vast majority of people in this country would do something about it if they knew. And the same for September 11th. I mean, I come from New York, blocks from Ground Zero. September 11th, 2001, 3,000 people incinerated in a moment. We'll never actually know the real number, because those who go uncounted in life go uncounted in death. And they're the undocumented workers who are working at the World Trade Center, families still afraid to come forward, afraid they could be detained or deported. But that really matters. And what happened on that day is absolutely horrific. But I don't think you can even call them journalists, the media personalities on television who kept intoning this figure, 90% of Americans are for war after September 11th. I never thought it was true. And they went to the experts in terrorism, the Oliver Norths and the Henry Kissingers. Well, maybe the corporate media got it right in that one case. The terrorism experts, it takes one to know one. And I don't say that lightly with someone like Henry Kissinger. You look at his record in Chile. I mean, there was another September 11th, September 11th, 1973. In fact, when the second plane hit the second tower of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, we were doing a special on Democracy Now! At that moment on the connection between terror and the date, September 11th, 1973, when the democratically elected leader of Chile, Salvador Allende, died in the palace as the U.S.-backed Pinochet forces rose to power, ultimately killing thousands of Chileans. That's the U.S.-backed, the Nixon-backed, the Kissinger-backed Pinochet forces. And I think that Henry Kissinger must be held accountable, as he should be in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos for what happened there, as he should be for what happened in Timor, the day before the Indonesian invasion of Timor. I do think that Osama bin Laden and his allies his accomplices should be tried for what happened on September 11th. But I also think that Henry Kissinger should be tried for war crimes. We have to have a universal standard of justice.
Let's talk about, you mentioned this throughout your book about oil and how it does cause so much pain, and you brought up Chevron in Nigeria. How do you see the future when it comes to oil?
Well, first of all, I think our reliance on oil can change. I think there are other forms of energy. But oil will not last forever. But we can get oil fairly. It doesn't just have to be at any cost. I mean, the people of Timor are more than willing to share the oil in the Timor Gap, the oil that Indonesia and Australia stole from them. They would sell it. The people of Nigeria in the Niger Delta, a great source of U.S. oil, would be more than willing to fairly share the oil. I mean, they want the financial resources. We don't take it at all costs. And in Iraq right now, I mean, you have a situation in Iraq where now we're seeing the generals under Saddam Hussein regaining power, not because they're taking it from the U.S. The U.S. is now working with Saddam Hussein's, for example, in Fallujah, major general under Saddam Hussein, returning the power to them. Now, so then what is different between now and when Saddam Hussein was in power? If you've got the same people in charge, the only difference is the U.S. now controls the oil. I think that people have their natural resources, and if we're going to take them, use them, we have to pay a fair price for them. And if we think that price is too high, if we are not willing to pay a fair amount for the value of that oil, well, then we can turn to other sources of oil. But we don't have the right to just go in and take them.
Thank you, Amy Goodman, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.